Next one will be also from the New York. It's the Leon Victor. She's here. Oh, here, right? Oh, who is the assistant director of the shelter of the New York Asia's Women's Center? Okay, please.
So I wanted to focus a little bit more. Do you have my PowerPoint? It's the financial literacy.
Okay. Just 1 second.
So in working in New York Asian Women's Center, I am now transitioning into the director of shelter operations position. So I oversee a lot of different programs. I oversee our transitional housing program, our emergency shelters, and also our hotline services. So when I'm talking about financial literacy, I'm not going to just focus on the shelter piece. I'm going to bring in our non-residential program as well. New York Asian Women's Center was founded in 1983 by a group of volunteers. We originally started as really hotline services, and then we grew from there. We now currently have 2 emergency shelters that are HRA administered, meaning the city is in charge of our shelters, and so we provide the services to our survivors. We have about 40 beds in our shelters. We also have a transitional housing program. So in this program, we have a grant with the Department of Justice where we provide 12 families rent subsidies and support services to help them basically get on their feet in a 24-month period of time. So it's a longer stint of programs where they are living in their own independent apartment. We provide them financial support and support services in terms of counseling and anything else that's going on in her life. Like Kristen, we are very much trauma-informed as well and very survivor-centered in our approach. So everything we do is in a collaborative way. So non-res doesn't do its own thing and residential does its own thing. We kind of really try to work together. And in talking about financial literacy, recently the New York City's domestic violence programs have realized the importance of financial literacy. We can skip this one as well. So I just wanted to give you a bunch of stats. These are old stats, but to give you an idea of what domestic violence looks like in New York City specifically. There are about 150,000 reported cases of domestic violence in 2006, and over time, you saw with Kristen's slide that it's a higher number now. And a lot of the times, the survivors are female. A fair majority of the survivors that we work with are female. We do provide services to men, but at this time, shelter services are not open to men. Women in general receive more physical violence and more other levels of violence than men do when they're survivors of domestic violence. We can skip over the next slide. And this is the type of violence that we're talking about. We're talking about the power and control wheel, where there's so many different factors that come into play that then help subjugate a woman and put her in a position where she's somewhat subservient to a male figure. So there's various different aspects of this. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the economic abuse. So why are we talking about economic and financial abuse? Because it's one of the major factors that is a decision-making goal for why a woman chooses to stay or leave a domestic violence scenario. And so these are some of the things that she would have to encounter. So it's forbidding her to work, controlling how money is spent, not giving her allowance at times, forcing her to write bad checks. So in New York City specifically, we have a lot of this identity theft and fraudulent stuff that's happening around her finances. So he's going to rack up the bill under her credit using her social security number, which then impacts her credit score, which one has long-term effects, because then she'll be incapable of buying a house potentially. She'll have all of this debt, and employment history is affected as a result of that. So there's a lot of layering factors that help actually make the situation for her a little bit worse. Next slide. So these are some of the impacts of all of that financial abuse. There's physical and emotional scars always. There are ruined credit scores. There's sporadic employment history. So if part of his power and control tactic is to prevent her from working or to enter her work site and cause issues there, it creates a sporadic employment background for her, which makes it difficult for her then to get to that self-sufficiency point. There's a lot of legal issues that happen. There's increased debt. There's lowered sense of confidence in decision-making, lowered self-esteem, like I said, identity theft, and then we've also realized that when she's going through all of this, the process that's in place in our system in New York City actually is too lengthy and too cumbersome, and it actually makes it more difficult for her to get to a self-sufficiency point. Next slide. So I wanted to also, because it's New York Asian Women's Center, we're very culturally sensitive to the type of services that we're doing, and we also consider that to be trauma-informed. So these are some of the socio-cultural factors that are coming into play when a survivor walks through our door. There is this internalization of, this is my fault, I caused this to my children, I caused this to my family. Now my family's asking me to stay with him, and I'm thinking that maybe it's not a good choice for me. Then there's internalization of her self-worth. So you're worthless, you deserve this. This happened to you because you did A, B, or C to me. The systems in her home country, so we're talking about Pan-Asia. We provide services to every person in Asia, but we also provide a lot of services to the individuals that are born and raised here. But when we're talking about immigrant communities, we're talking about the sense of their systems in their home country vastly differ from what we have here. And so trying to reconcile that becomes a lengthy process. She definitely will have limited to no allies in her community or family network if she's kind of going against what they're wishing. She may be viewed as denying or minimizing or not cooperating with service providers, because a lot of the times we have service providers that actually say to you, you need to prove that you're a domestic violence survivor. You need to show me an OP order, which is an order of protection. You need to show me a police report saying that you are a survivor of domestic violence. And a lot of times our immigrant community women will not seek out law enforcement support. And there's that general fear and guilt of what's going to happen to me next, and then what is my family going to take away from this when I decide to leave. Next slide. So again, why are we focusing on this? One of the major decision factors, like I said before, is this idea of how am I going to get to a self-sufficiency point if I'm coming from an environment where I've kind of had no work history, I don't know how to manage my finances, and now I'm coming to an environment where potentially that's something that I have to do. So I'm going to need more support in doing that. And many who do choose to leave, who do come into our shelters, the systems in place, there are limited housing options. There's difficulty in like Kristen said, there's a lot of jobs that are out there that are below living wage. So she's actually in this cycle of poverty after she leaves. And so a large part of what our work needs to now include is, what do we do with that little money that you're making? How is it that we can help that last a longer amount of time, or how do we get you to a point where you're making more money? And then in general, women as a gender role construct they face a lot more difficulties because of their social conditioning to be able to manage finances and then to understand money. Every one of us have difficulties talking about money, and it's a part of what we learned in doing our work in New York Asian Women's Center, but it's something that we realize we have to do now to help her get to a self-sufficiency point. So when I talk about economic empowerment, I'm talking about financial literacy, knowing what a bank statement is, knowing what a bank account is, knowing the difference between a checking and a savings, knowing what my credit score is, but then also having the resources, options, and the confidence to make decisions about my economic standing. So that's what we call economic self-sufficiency. And then self-efficacy. So it's a lot of this aspect of taking trauma-informed services, taking the idea that I am capable of doing this, understanding her trauma history, but then also getting to a point where she asserts her own agency. So we can keep going. We can keep going from there. It's good. I'm running out of time. So these are the interventions, and when we talk about interventions, I'm talking about layered support. So breaking it down for her, getting her to see, getting an assessment point. What is it that you do know about financial literacy, and how is it that we can get you to point B, to point C, to point D? So some of the things that we do initially is financial safety planning. Where are your paperwork? Where's your social security number? Where is the birth certificates for you and your children? Where are those things? And how can we help safeguard them? And if you don't have them, if you left them in the abusive environment, how is it that we can now get duplicates for you? That's the primary foundational work that we do. Then we work with her to kind of assess, what is it that you want to do in terms of your finances? What are your goals? And let's baby step what you need to do to get to that goal. So whether it is, all right, let's start small. You want to save for a laptop because you want to long term, it's going to help you for your employment work, for looking for employment. Okay, what does that number look like, and how is it that we can begin to save now, considering you have a job in a restaurant that's cash-based? And then strengthen her connections to the use of community resources. New York City has a lot of resources that they're now investing, especially domestic violence providers, in financial literacy. So we have the financial clinic in New York City that's run in various different community offices, but also in the family justice centers. So we look at that as well. And we also touch on this is where trauma-informed services come into play. It's more economic and emotional abuse. How did the abuse impact her decision-making skills? And what is it that she's doing to kind of take the agency away from herself? Next slide. So I'm not going to go into the shelter environment because, like I said, we try to do services in a collaborative way. So I do focus on shelter work. So we do primarily foundational level work. But let's go to the next slide and focus on who New York Asian Women's Center serves. In 2013, we had a total enrollment of 746 clients. This is a breakdown of the types of services that we provide in 2013. So for non-residential, we had 88. For our residential cases, it's small. We have 40 beds, so we served over 23 women. But we think with the small amount of beds that we do have, we're able to do a little bit more personal type of services. Next slide. There are struggles to consider when we're talking about working for counselors and for survivors to talk about financial literacy. We realize that it's hard for us to manage our own finances, so we take that and we understand that. And when we're working with our staff, we make sure that the training is broken down as well, like we would with a client. And it's very important to understand her baseline. What is her understanding of financial literacy so that we can then meet her where she's at. So that's, again, trauma-informed. And then understanding that their fear of U.S. systems in general when we're talking about immigrant communities. My time's up. So then we can look at that aspect as well and see how we can bridge gaps with the systems here. And these are some of the outcomes we had for our financial literacy program in New York Asian Women's Center for 2013.
What is the economic empowerment? I think Alena have a very good experience sharing.